Welcome back, one and all, and thank you for joining me today. As always, I am Daniel Blake, and before we get into today's topic, I did just want to let you all know that it is a little bit controversial. So, I will be sticking to the facts and history of the topic at hand and not providing very much personal opinion because I do not want you to think that I am advocating for or against the use of this substance. Now, with that out of the way, we're going to be taking today to talk about a drug of many names. Call it weed, pot, grass, or about a million other ways that you could say marijuana. Now more than ever, it seems like everyone has an opinion of the substance, whether positive or negative. One thing is the same on both sides of the argument, though. Most of it is based on nothing more than misconceptions or personal opinion without much fact at all being involved in the argument. So I figured it was finally time to brush the dust off my criminal justice degree I got 5 years ago and let you all know a brief legal history of marijuana in the United States. In 1619, King James I of England told the Jamestown colony that they needed to contribute more to the economy of England and suggested the colonists grow hemp. This fibrous plant was utilized as a base component of making items such as rope and other textiles due to its ease of growing and durability. Along with tobacco and cotton, hemp actually became a major crop export from the colonies. Founding father and first president George Washington actually grew it as one of his primary crops at Mount Vernon. It wasn't until 1839 that a physician by the name of William O'Shaughnessy officially suggested that marijuana could be used for pain relief, and in the 1850s, concentrated cannabis became available for purchase in pharmacies. Regulation of the sale of pharmaceuticals also began in the 1850s, and cannabis was labeled as a fashionable narcotic. Marijuana parlors actually began popping up all over the East Coast of the United States because of the popularity of the product. In 1890, the National American Women's Suffrage Association was founded, which became the largest women's rights group in the United States. While their primary focus was for women's voting rights and education, they also advocated for the prohibition of recreational drugs and alcohol. In 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed by the U.S. Congress, which required certain products to include a label that informed consumers of the exact compounds that were in the product they were buying. This included concentrated cannabis. In 1930, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was formed in an effort to outlaw all recreational drugs. The then head of the FBN, Henry Anslinger, made multiple false claims about cannabis specifically, claiming it caused people to become violent and increased the chance of someone committing SA. The problem for Anslinger was the public support was not yet convinced of these claims. Enter William Hearst. In 1937, he was the owner of the largest newspaper chain in the United States at the time, which encompassed 30 different papers at its peak, including the San Francisco Examiner, the New York Journal, and the Washington Times. Hearst teamed up with Anslinger, becoming the propaganda master for the FBN. He used his countrywide influence to repeatedly publish false statistics and what became the most damning attack against marijuana, human interest stories. Hearst would pay civilians to make up personal stories about their experience while high and ensured that it lined up with Anslinger's narrative of violence and SA. You may now be wondering, well, why would Hearst agree to work with Anslinger in the first place, and fairly so? Well, that is because not only was he a newspaper tycoon, he was also a major investor in the wood paper milling industry, which was a rival with the hemp industry, so he desperately wanted to see hemp put out of business. The combined effort was wildly successful because later that same year, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, making the possession of marijuana federally illegal for recreational purposes, and imposed an excise tax on any licensed manufacturers selling any hemp products or physicians that prescribed cannabis to their patients. In 1951, the Boggs Act was passed, which set mandatory sentencing for drug offenses. For a first-time offender, possession of marijuana had a mandatory sentence of at least 2 years in a penitentiary and a fine of at least $20,000, or a modern-day equivalency of $242,150.77. In 1969, the Supreme Court of the United States deemed the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 to be unconstitutional after the hearing of Leary v. United States. In its place, the Controlled Substance Act of 1970 was enacted, which labeled cannabis as a Schedule I narcotic, meaning it is easily abused and has no medical benefit, which prevented marijuana from being prescribed by physicians. Under President Ronald Reagan, two major acts were created against the use of drugs. Firstly, the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984 created mandatory sentencing guidelines for any drug offenders. Secondly, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 implemented mandatory penitentiary sentences for drug offenders, including basic possession. This was later amended to create the Three Strikes rules, which had a mandatory 25-year prison sentence for repeat offenders, including basic drug offenses like possession. In 1988, DEA Judge Francis Young ruled in favor of reclassifying marijuana as a Schedule II narcotic. However, this was a non-binding recommendation and was later denied by the lead administrator of the DEA, John Lawn. In 1990, the Solomon-Lautenberg Amendment encouraged the states to suspend the driver's license of anyone who committed a drug offense for a minimum of 6 months, even if no motor vehicle was involved. In 1996, California became the first state to legalize medical cannabis. The U.S. Congress blocked this by passing Resolution 117, which stated that the FDA was responsible for determining the safety and validity of drugs, not state government. This was contested again by the Supreme Court case of United States versus Oakland Cannabis Buyers Cooperative in 2001 and Gonzalez versus Rage in 2005, finding in favor of the United States federal government in both situations. Regardless of the results of these rulings, multiple states pushed forward with leniency towards marijuana, and in 2001, Nevada became the first state to decriminalize cannabis. In 2012, Colorado and Washington became the first two states to legalize recreational use of marijuana in well over 100 years, and even though the plant remains classified as a Schedule I narcotic by the DEA and illegal federally, 38 states have legalized the medical use of marijuana, 31 states have decriminalized it, and 24 states have legalized the recreational use of marijuana. And lastly, in 2022 and then expanded in 2023, President Joe Biden ordered the pardoning and immediate release of any federal prisoners for all marijuana possession offenses. However, this did not include those prosecuted on the state level. And with that, we are now all up to date of the legality of marijuana in the United States. Of course, there's a whole cultural and societal aspect to it we haven't even touched on yet. So if you would like to see a video on that, please feel free to let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, leaving a like and subscribe would be fabulous. And I also have a Patreon in my bio if you're feeling extra generous, but definitely no pressure on that whatsoever. Thank you so much for sticking with me this long. I hope you have just the most wonderful day, and we'll talk more soon. Deuces!